When I arrived in Vietnam, American GIs were very mistrustful of civilians, people who dress like me. They viewed us as the REMF, rear echelon MF, you can substitute the word. And there was always an incentive on the part of people in my situation to try to prove yourself to the GIs, that you were not simply sucking up on a good thing and avoiding the tough stuff, the fighting. And so, in my case, I overcompensated. I became obsessed with exposing myself to great danger. And you may say, how juvenile. No, I felt that it was my duty not to shy away from combat and from danger. And I probably became obsessive about it. If there was an assignment that would expose me to bad stuff, I took it. If there was a prisoner that needed to be interrogated in the boonies and the highlands, I went there. I remember flying into the Delta one day on a CIA Porter aircraft. These were the short landing aircraft that could come down, stop on a dime, great in free fire zones. I was in this aircraft winging my way to the Delta to an interrogation or whatever it was. And we began taking ground fire. And I looked out and there were rounds pinging through the wings. And the pilot was trying to hold the plane steady. And I think there was somebody else in the aircraft with me besides the pilot. And my companion was going freako because we were taking fire. And I have to say I was horrified at my reaction and surprised. I loved it. I loved it. That's how sick I was. I felt I was experiencing my Hemingway moment. I was becoming the true quiet American. And rather than, I'm embarrassed to tell you that, but it was part of my personality. And when I wrote my book, my memoir of the War of East Interval, I kept myself in low profile because what I experienced was nothing like what GIs experienced on an hourly, moment-to-moment basis. I did have respite from the bloodshed. But I didn't stay away from it. And in retrospect, I don't know whether that made me crazy or what. It just completed the picture. It completed the picture. The CIA gave me a medal and a big award after the fall of Saigon. I was embarrassed by it because nothing I'd done had sufficed to make any difference. The award cited me for having been extraordinarily prescient about what was happening. It was written by the CIA station chief, by the way, and he commended me, this was his phrase, for courage under fire. And I didn't speak of this in my memoir, but as I reached my 78th year, yeah, I'm that old, I actually take some pride that that was part of my legacy there. I didn't let my fellow 25-year-olds do all the fighting and risk-taking. I felt it was part of my obligation to do it myself. And I was blown up on a number of occasions. I'm partly deaf in one ear because somebody threw a IUD, a hand grenade, at my reinforced Pinto CIA issued car. Pintos came to be known ultimately for their volatile gas tanks. The CIA bought a whole bunch of them and gave them to us in Vietnam who worked for the CIA. And I was in my Pinto one day and somebody threw this bomb at the car. Didn't blow the car up, it should have, I guess, but it sure blew my eardrum out. And so I wore that injury and continue to this day like some kind of weird badge of honor. But again, nothing compared to what GIs had to experience. The problem is when you come in and you're trying to compensate in a war zone, and I did it, you do more than you should. You do stupid things. I wasn't supposed to go into the field and put myself at risk because remember, my head was filled with secrets. That was the only thing that made me different from anybody else. I had been picked out of the lineup, CIA lineup, and not because I was smart or deserved it, but simply because I was a warm body in the right place at the wrong moment. I was made an analyst and given access to all these secrets. And because I had that access and had this stuff in my head, I wasn't supposed to go out where I could get captured. So I was actually violating the rules by volunteering for hazardous duty, which I was paid for in Vietnam. I'm still a little sensitive about talking about any of this because, again, the GIs were the real fighters. My job, the intelligence gathering job, was designed to save their lives. And boy, was I devoted to gathering intelligence for that purpose. That was my mantra, my moral, as I said. Morality? People will tell you that morality was transactional in Vietnam. I have another way of looking at it. Let me tell you a story. At one point, I discovered that a prisoner I was interrogating had been beaten to a pulp. I was trying to question him and he fell over on the chipped mica top table and couldn't talk to me. He'd been beaten by his Vietnamese guards. I was shocked. This was early in my first tour. And I went to my CIA superior and I said, God damn it. I've just been through the most immoral situation, sir. And he said, stop talking. And I thought I'd said something that was going to get me fired. I was stunned. And I said, I'm just telling you about this prison. And he said, use the word immoral. Doesn't belong in this war. He said, what? You want me to go to the South Vietnamese police, the people who are managing this prisoner, and say to them, you gotta stop torturing this prisoner because some white kid from the United States thinks it's immoral and seems oblivious that there are 140,000 North Vietnamese troops within 20 minutes of downtown Saigon. Frank, you want me to go and tell the South Vietnamese to stop torturing a prisoner because you have a moral objection to it? Well, I thought my career was over when he said this to me. I thought I was done for. And I was scouring my brain for the right answer. I said, well, he can't talk to me when he's beaten up. That, he said, you tell me that, and I can use that as an argument to stop the torture. I can go and tell the Vietnamese in charge of this interrogation that the prisoner can't talk, and if he can't talk, we can't save South Vietnamese lives. That's a pragmatic argument I can make. Learn this lesson, Frank. Never argue morality in Vietnam. Argue pragmatism. Understand? Yes, sir. I understand. That lesson stayed with me to the end. Morality became white noise as a concept. It was whether what I was doing or not doing affected the flow of information. If it didn't affect the flow, it was a no-go. Morality had nothing to do with it. If the torture of a prisoner shut the prisoner down and he couldn't tell me the truth, that was a no-go. Not because it was immoral, but because we couldn't get the information we needed from him to save Vietnamese lives and American lives. Saving those lives was a moral mission, but it didn't have any part of the language of the people that I dealt with. And so after the war, when people in the anti-war movement said, "Oh, Frank, when did you ever realize that you were involved in an immoral war?" I'd say, never discussed it. My job was getting at the truth and getting it to Washington so that it could make a difference for the better. End of story. Morality was not part of the dialogue of war. Very important for those of you who are many years removed from Vietnam, know nothing about it, to understand this. In fact, understand it about any war. Morality is something we must never let go of. We must remain true to our own sense of morality. When I refused to allow the torture of a prisoner, in my heart I knew that somewhere the Episcopalian in me was asserting himself. But a CIA agent doesn't talk about morality. It's about, you say it back to me, getting at the truth and getting it to people who can make a difference for the better.